Good afternoon, members. Welcome. It's great to see so many members of the public here. And we're also being webcast, so good afternoon to everybody on the webcast. Hope you enjoy this meeting. Safety instructions. We have a number of exits. Obviously, retrace your steps out through the main entrance. There are exits behind here as well, if necessary. And hopefully, we won't have any fires or anything like that happening. Agenda item number 2, apologies for absence and substitutions. Ellie, did you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Councillor Ellie King. I'm new to this committee. I represent Hillfields in East Bristol.
Thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Item number 3, declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest? No? Okay. We then move on to public forum, and we have received a record number of public forum statements. We have received 100. 99 in favour of making the public rights of way and 1 against. We have 30 minutes for public forum and we have 100 statements, so we do have a bit of a challenge, but what I would say is that nobody's obliged to speak, but obviously we'll hopefully get to as many people as we possibly can. To try and keep it as balanced as possible, given the numbers, what I was proposing to do is to ask the claimant, Professor Alan Preece, to start the public forum and speak first. I'll then ask the objector, there is one objector, Cottam School, either Joe Butler or Sandra Fryer, to speak on behalf of the school. And then what I will do is I will take it sequentially through the as received, if everybody's happy with that. Members happy with that? Okay. Right. So, Professor Alan Preece, without further ado, you have the microphone.
If I can switch it on. It seems to be working. Thank you. Chairman, members of the committee, as the applicant, I'd like to comment on just 3 or 4 points that arise from the recent response by Cottam and their London barristers, Good Enough Ring, to the independent inspector's assessment. The first one is simply an assumption based on total ignorance. Their point 6A on page 810 in their response, the objection is called important considerations. They say the consistent conclusion from the TVG statements is that pro-witnesses must be lying. They just wandered or played games and they were not using Stoke Lodge as a footpath. What they can't know is that 72 of my 114 or so witnesses never made any statement to a TVG inquiry, and I did get a member of the TVG team to check this for me. So I'm prepared to say that the witnesses that I found were not lying. And while I agree that some will have used it for dual purpose as I did in the past, there were occasions when I played games with the children and the grandchildren, but on other days I simply went shopping, which meant going through the park or go to the pub or go down to the local garage or to the bus stop. And in fact, when I was a governor of Cedar Park School, I regularly used Route 2 to find out what a glorious shortcut this was for parents with small children getting to that school. They also raised point 6B, which puts size as an issue, and they ignore the fact it's been discounted consistently. There never has been a sign on the Chain Road to Parry's Lane route, and in any way, the wording elsewhere in Stoke Lodge just doesn't prohibit walking and access. And in fact, Mr. Petrie, when the TVG assessment, he just called it, as at very least, very peculiar wording. The other point 3 on page 812 of Cottam's response about needing exclusive use of the whole field just isn't true. They managed perfectly well up to 2019, as did Fairfield before them, and even when the fence went up, I've never ever seen, and I do overlook Stoke Lodge, a quarter of the field in use, never more than that. And importantly, Ofsted have repeatedly confirmed that Cottam do not require to fence off-site playing fields. Finally, point 8 on page 810 of the barrister's statement about waiting till the outcome of the TVG appeal next year. I understood from attending many meetings of this committee that TDG and PROS were completely different matters legally and were not required to interfere with each other. So to summarise, I really ask the committee to accept the advice from Robin Carr. He is, after all, the pro-legal expert, and from the BCC Pro team, who had the opportunity to really thoroughly examine the evidence, and to ask you to recommend approval of a map modification order so the community can continue to have access as they have in the past. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Is Sandra Fryer or Joanne Butler here from Cotton School? No. Okay. Now, I have been given a list of people who would definitely like to speak. That doesn't mean that if your name isn't on this list, you can't, but I will run through the list which the officer has given me. So, Helen Powell. Is Helen Powell here?
Of course. Cotton School claims that in the TVG process, all use was found to be village green use, but that's simply not true. The TVG report confirms that there was separate Proud use, it just wasn't relevant to that application, so please don't let them deceive you. Then there are the signs, but what those signs don't say is keep out, no right of entry. They don't prohibit walking across the field, and your expert says the signs were not sufficient. Implied permission is a bad argument that's already failed in TVG1 and in the High Court. Cotton claims that granting the paths makes use of the playing fields impossible. But as the report says, the Highways Act recognises that public rights-of-way can exist across school land. So the only thing that's incompatible with statute is Cotton's argument. Other Bristol schools have Prouds too. Cotton signed up to a lease that is subject to all existing rights and use of the land. Today we ask you to formally recognise existing rights and use in these highly valued public rights of way. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. David Mayer. Is David Mayer here? Thank you.
Good afternoon, my name is David Mayer, and I'm very well aware that the 855-page report before you is long and complicated. However, when considering and making your decision, I ask that you remember two numbers, which are 7 and 34. 7 refers to page 7, and 34 refers to page 34. Page 7 is where you find the recommendation from your own public rights of way officers. Page 34 is where you find the recommendation from the independent expert appointed by Bristol City Council. Significantly, both contain a recommendation to approve and register these public rights of way. Importantly, these recommendations were made after a full and critical analysis of all the evidence and legal arguments contained within the whole 855 pages, including the sad and desperate attempt by Cotton to confuse and kick this decision into the long grass. I therefore urge you to agree with the rationale and the findings of the officers and experts on pages 7 and 34 and confirm the rights of way. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Robin Parker. Is Robin Parker here?
Good afternoon, councillors and assembled people. I'd like you to remember one age, and that's, or date, and that's 1947, when I was born in Reedy Road. I had 3 siblings, and we all used those fields regularly, particularly crossing to XID school, as most of you won't remember. I currently have a sibling who lives in Sea Mills Lane, and I cross over there regularly. I used to, up until a fortnight ago, walk there every single day, twice a day, with my dog Dimpy. However, he died 2 weeks ago. I still go out and I still walk. I'm sorry, Shirley, I haven't told you, have I? So, yes, it's very sad. But I think not to ignore the fact that the Ordnance Survey maps actually show rights of way, if you look at the right Ordnance Survey, to decline us the right to walk across that green would be entirely wrong. In my view, having worked in Bristol and lived in Bristol throughout my life, well, except for a short period in London, I have found that documents that are over about 4 A4 sheets are hiding something. I haven't read this 860-page document. Who has? Generally speaking, in my experience, things of that length are hiding something which people don't want to see and don't want to hear. If it had been on an A4 sheet, or 4 of them, I think we all would have read them. Good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, just for the avoidance of doubt, I've certainly read the whole of the 860 pages, and I suspect my members have too. A lot of them actually are the witness statements, a lot of photographs, diagrams, so it's not quite as bad as it sounds. And condolences on the loss of Dinky. I'm very sorry to hear that. Next on my list, Susan Hollyman. Is Susan here?
I'm a user of the pathways on Stoke Lodge. Since 1975, almost 50 years ago, I have used these marked pathways, especially from the Druid Hill roundabout, Chain Road. We were walkers that would venture out to Blaze, Kings Weston and the banks of the River Trim and the River Avon using connecting pathways. 20 years ago, my daughter moved into Bellback Road, across the other side of the hills. The grandchildren came safely and happily across to visit us and vice versa. They would cartwheel up, enjoying the freedom and space. I would meet them at the top wall to escort them safely across the road at the roundabout, which is very dangerous. Now, aged 80, the 3 generations of my family regularly use these pathways. Please register rights of way formally for all our city future generations.
Thank you very much. Susan Mayer. Susan Mayer here.
Having made a statement in writing, I would like to summarise my experience of Stoke Lodge as an open green space. But as a newbie of just 34 years, there are others who've used the pathways for much longer. Sadly, many are no longer here, and so I must testify on their behalf. The old Avon signs have been declared ineffective time and again. Just 2 signs on a 23-acre site, one behind a tall hedge beyond a small gateway off West Dean, and the other actually faced a goods yard that was fenced and separated from the field for many years. Bristol City Council and Cotton both failed to install new signs that could have rendered public access permissive and in a timely manner when Avon ceased to be an authority. Now too late, Cotton seek to do just that. Please put an end to this shameful waste of council resources and school funds on a fool's errand to nowhere and grant the proud routes in full today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jenny and Peter Weeks. You're happy not to speak? Okay. John Moore.
I haven't got my statement with me, but...
Do you want to say a few words?
Yes, Is it on? Yeah. I've lived in Stoke Bishop since 1985, We've used the pathways across Stoke Lodge with our children back in the 1990s, 1980s. We've used the kicking across the playing fields to King's Weston, to Blaise Castle, and to the shops. We used to, I used to put the goalposts up for Shire Colts on Stoke Lodge, and we were always popping over to the co-op on Saturday mornings or Sunday mornings to buy oranges and whatever for the half-time breaks. Lately, my cousin in C Mills has become housebound, so I've been going across the field to him. Luckily, about once a week, possibly twice a week, luckily the fence is no longer in operation, but the fence was always a problem in that in order to avoid the fence, you had to either walk along the roads, which was a lot of traffic, usually travelling fairly rapidly, or you had these narrow corridors that became very muddy and wet in winter. That's about all I can say, I think.
That's fine. Thanks very much, John. Shirley Brown. Is Shirley here?
Cottam School's lease is subject to all existing rights and uses of the property, including use by the community. Sandra Fryer has claimed, quote, "The reference to community use in our lease does not confer the right to use our playing fields, but rather that the school can manage and enable community use." Well, it's true that the reference doesn't confer any rights. The community had already established long-standing unopposed use of Stoke Lodge, not only for recreation, but also along the footpaths you're considering today that are vital links between friends, families and local facilities. We don't need a school based 3 miles away to manage and enable our use of land that we've been able to use freely for decades. We live there. In their statement today, Cottam School objects to the timing of this committee before the High Court hearing on the TVG. Ironically, timing didn't bother them when they put their fence up several months after Mr. Priest's application to have these footpaths had been validated. I trust you now to enable continued open access and sharing of the well-documented benefits of these well-established footpaths for all who walk on them. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Shirley. Michael Sheehan.
Good afternoon, committee. I would urge you to pass the resolution as recommended by your own independent inspection. I've personally used these footpaths for in excess of 50 years, and any suggestion that these footpaths aren't legal is just plainly wrong. I can only say I've never met a local who has an objection to Cottam School using the land as playing fields. We've always said clearly that we are happy to share the land, but unfortunately Cottam seem to have another agenda which one can only speculate as to where this is leading. All I can say is, please pass the resolution.
Thank you very much. Cathy Wellen. Is Cathy? Yes.
The paths you're considering today link neighbourhoods and families, friends and classmates, and everyone with shops, surgeries, schools, nurseries, adult education courses, vets, village hall, the post office, cafes, pubs, all the places that are accessible safely on foot or bike to so many local people via the well-known, constantly trodden footpaths threaded through Stoke Lodge. They make of this built-up suburb an overarching, connected community. when the lawless, pitiless, needless fence chopped up our ways of access and casual contacts, we felt isolated, dislocated, robbed of interacting, sharing news, spotting needs, and distressed to see so many badgers killed on busy roads as they were cut off from their ancestral routes. No access for hot air balloons or the air ambulance either. The paths were here before us. Please register and protect them for the future to sustain this strong, resilient community.
Thank you, Kathy. Is there anybody else who would like to speak? Please indicate, because I haven't got their name, but anybody else would like to speak? Otherwise, I will bring public forum to a close. Thank you very much, members of the public. As I say, it's really good to see you here. This is what democracy and democratic engagement is all about. I'm sorry you're a little distant from us, but these are, it's the chamber. It's a sort of not the most user-friendly of meeting places, but because of the numbers, we've had to use the chamber. Okay, item number 5. We're now on to the actual report itself, and I just want to place on record my thanks to Robin Carr, who was the consultant that was used to actually produce the report. It is a mammoth document. It's already been commented on. It is a huge document, although some of it is witness statements and photographs. It did take quite some reading, but the actual report bit, if I can use that phrase, was written in fairly plain English, actually, and was pretty readable, and did actually have some very clear recommendations, which was really helpful. What I'll ask first, before members we discuss the matter, it's probably helpful to get some context. I'm going to ask Duncan Venison to take us through the report, and then Dawn Boddle afterwards will give us some legal advice, and then I'll throw it open to everybody to discuss it. I'm sure we've got a lot to say. Duncan?
The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So officers have engaged an independent consultant, Robin Carr Associates, to prepare a report to assist Bristol City Council, the surveying authority, with the determination of the application which seeks to register public rights of way over the route shown by broken black lines on the plan at Appendix 1. The application routes are as follows. Route 1, Chain Road to Powers Lane. Route 2, Shirehampton Road to West Dean. Route 3, Route 1 to Route 2. And Route 4, which is Route 1 and again to Route 2. The purpose of the report is to provide the Public Rights of Way and Greens Committee with sufficient information and guidance to determine an application for an order under Section 53(3)(c)(1) of the Wildlife and Countryside Act 1981 to modify the definitive mapping statement by the addition of footpaths. The statutory test for presumed dedication is whether a way over any land has been actually enjoyed by the public as of right and without interruption for a full period of 20 years. Should this be the case, the way is deemed to have been dedicated as a highway unless there is sufficient evidence that there was no intention by the landowner during that period to dedicate it. In total, 155 user evidence forms were submitted claiming use of the application routes. Of these, 57 people claimed use of Route 1 between 1946 and 2018. 39 people claimed use of Route 2 between 1965 and 2018. 25 people claimed use of Route 3 between 1960 and 2018, and 34 people claimed the use of Route 4 between 1946 and 2018. The evidence provided shows that it is reasonable to allege that the claimed routes subsist based on the available evidence of user between 1946 and 2018. It would be reasonable to allege that there is insufficient evidence to indicate that landowners had taken overt action to demonstrate to users that they did not intend to dedicate a right-of-way over the claimed routes prior to 2018. Section 31(3) of the Highways Act 1980 provides that where the owner of the land over which any such way as aforesaid passes has erected in such manner as to be visible to persons using the right-of-way inconsistent with the dedication of the way as a highway, and has maintained the notice after the 1st of January 1934 or any later date on which it was erected. The notice, in the absence of proof of a contrary intention, is sufficient evidence to negative the intention to dedicate the way as a highway. Signs were erected at points S1, S2 and S3 on Plan 1, Appendix 1, in the mid-1980s, with the sign at S2 being replaced circa 2008 and the sign at S1 being replaced circa 2018.
The wording on these signs might not, however, be deemed to convey the necessary lack of intention to dedicate to the users of the application routes, who may consider themselves to be exercising a public right-of-way rather than trespassing. It should, however, be noted that qualifying 20-year periods may exist prior to the signs being erected in 1985. Definitive map modification orders do not extinguish or create any public rights-of-way. They simply seek to amend the legal records to reflect the existing and true situation with regard to the existence and extent of public rights-of-way. As a result, matters such as desirability, suitability, need, property values, security, privacy, and even public safety, whilst all genuine concerns, are not matters that can lawfully be taken into consideration in the decision-making process. It is the independent consultant's view that there are sufficient grounds for making the requested definitive map modification order on the basis that it can be reasonably alleged that public rights subsist. The surveying authority must make its own decision based upon the available and relevant evidence as detailed in the independent report. Should the authority resolve to make an order, there will then be formal consultation to allow for any additional evidence to come forward for consideration as part of the final determination whether or not to confirm the order. Any resulting confirmation will be on the balance of probabilities that the rights of way subsist. Any such order will be advertised for a 6-week period. During this time, members of the public and the landowner can submit objections to the order. If objections are received, which are not subsequently withdrawn, the order would be submitted to the Secretary of State for determination. Should an order be made that receives no objections, a report would be brought to this committee to make a decision based upon the balance of probabilities.
Thanks very much. And I think, in fairness, on page 7, the recommendation is very clear, isn't it? That the Head of Legal Services be authorised to make and advertise a definitive map modification order to show the footpaths in the definitive map and statement as shown on the plan attached to this report. Thanks very much, Duncan. Can I ask Dawn? Dawn is one of our legal officers, and we'll talk a little bit more to page 8 of the report, which talks about the tests, the legal tests, and anything else that you'd like to advise us on.
So the relevant test in consideration today is, or the relevant clause is section 53, subsection 3C1 of the Wildlife and Countryside Act. And that is whether the right-of-way subsists or is reasonably alleged to subsist. So there's 2 different tests here, depending which one is considered preferable. So test A is whether the right-of-way subsists, and that has to be considered on a balance of probabilities based on the evidence. Then test B is if you consider the right-of-way is reasonably alleged to subsist, and this is a slightly lower test, and what is required is that it's necessary to show that a reasonable person, having considered all of the relevant evidence available, could reasonably allege that a right-of-way subsisted. And if you can consider that test B has been satisfied, as Duncan said, this will then go, the order will be made and it will go out to consultation for further evidence to come in. And then at confirmation stage, the test is that the right-of-way subsists on a balance of probabilities. So it's the higher test at the end for confirmation purposes. If there are objections, that test will be considered by the Secretary of State. But if there are no objections, that will come back to yourselves for consideration.
Thanks very much, Dawn. While I've got you here, members, do you have any questions on the legal tests? In which case, thank you very much. And what I will now do, I'll throw it open to the committee. Questions, queries, anything you want to raise, now is obviously the time to do it. Tim, thank you.
Sorry, I was trying not to start you off this time. I was hoping someone else spoke. But having read the inspector's report, near the end of the report, where he comes to the conclusions about whether the tests have been met, he breaks it down into, I think, 3 or 4 20-year periods. It seems to me that he is, because it's fairly brief in certain parts, but he seems to be arguing that the test has been met in all of those periods. Is that correct? Or some of those periods? I just wanted to clarify because sort of he has several time periods. In the report, it then says, yeah, it's his opinion the test has been met. Is he arguing that it's been met in all of those 20-year periods or some of those 20-year periods? I think that was probably where I wanted a little bit of clarification. Thank you.
I think one of the main reasons that a number of 20-year periods have been brought before us today is because of the presence of the signs from 1985. So we know that if a right-of-way is brought to be into challenge at a certain point, then 20 years previous to that, if you can demonstrate it's been used as a right. I think the reason it's mentioned these particular periods is because there is an argument that could be made that the signs that were put in place in 1985 could effectively prevent as of rights coming into being, in which case the 20 years previous to that could be brought into being, which would be 65 to 85. So that's the reason it's mentioned those. And it will be down to the committee today to consider, based on the evidence that's presented. And I mentioned in there the different, the evidence forms that were brought together, and the number of people that objected, the number of people that submitted evidence in those time periods, that there could be evidence or reasonable evidence to subsist to allege that rights of way do subsist.
Thanks. Perhaps I'll just expand on that, because as you were answering, it sort of occurred to me that I guess if you accept that between 65 and 85 rights were accrued that created this public right of way, it does not really matter then what happens after 1985. Those rights have been accrued. It is a public right of way. It just was not on the definitive map. Is that roughly correct?
Yes, that would be the case.
Thanks. And I guess my final question then is, there's no legal issue, I'm sure there isn't because it's not in the report, but I just want to ask that question, that we would be considering making a public right-of-way for a time period between 1965 and 1985 in 2024. That's perfectly legally acceptable.
Yes, that will be the case.
Thanks both. Ed. Thank you, Chair. So I had two sort of broad sets of questions. So first, it refers to content on page 34 of the documentation. So is it near certain that if we resolve to make a DMMO that, under the full test, that Cotton School would object and therefore it would be referred to the Secretary of State regardless? Is that a reasonable assertion?
I'll pass that over to Dawn and Duncan.
It wouldn't automatically be referred to the Secretary of State. It would only go to the Secretary of State if there were objections that couldn't be resolved or withdrawn.
Okay, but there is perhaps quite a high likelihood of that taking place. And it is also near certain that if we refuse the application, that the applicant would likely appeal, and therefore it would also be referred to the Secretary of State. Have I got that correct?
Yes, that's correct. If the applicant appealed, it would go to the Secretary of State to consider, and if they decide that the order should be made, it then comes back to us to make the order and go through the whole process.
Okay, thank you very much for explaining. So it sounds like that whatever we decide today, the practical effect is likely to be the same. That either way, there is a very high likelihood that this is going to be going to the Secretary of State, regardless of the decision we take today. So I'd also like to draw the committee's attention to page 561. So that shows a list of claims that refer to application route 1, and I think you highlighted that in the summary earlier. Page 561 is what I'm referring to. So that's the second page of 3 in the list. I believe I'm right in understanding that the first use of the marked pathways highlighted on that page is in 1946, and that the fields were purchased on the 19th of September 1947. Can I just validate those facts are correct?
Sorry, can you just repeat that last question?
Okay. So that the first use of the marked pathways that's referred to on page 561, so from the in the period of use, the earliest time given there is 1946. Just validating that is correct.
Yes, that is correct.
Thank you very much. And the remaining 22 acres of the fields were purchased on the 19th of September 1947 by the predecessor, Bristol City Council.
Yes, I think the report states that they were actually bought in 2 lots, the first one in 46, first one in 47.
That's great, thank you. In this report, is there any information that indicates any signage, fencing or locked gates were erected between the 19th of September 1947 and the 18th of September 1967?
We don't think that's been considered. No information has been brought forward by the landowner or any other evidence has been presented forward to consider that.
Okay, so no signage, fencing or locked gates are recorded as being erected between those times, and there don't appear to have been any other recorded attempts to restrict rights of way between the 19th of September 1947 and the 18th of September 1967.
Yeah, that's correct.
Seems quite clear then. I've got no further questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. Anybody else? Just want to raise any questions? Don?
Yes, thanks, Chair. We have quite a long backlog of work on this committee, some going back, shall we say, decades, and many applicants waiting to have their applications heard, myself included, actually. I waited a number of years for my application to be heard. Is there any reason why this has been rushed through on an extraordinary committee?
I think in fairness, Don, this hasn't been rushed through at all. This has been outstanding for quite a long time. I can ask the officers obviously prioritise the applications. I think it's to do with whether the routes are blocked possibly. Duncan, do you want to explain the methodology for prioritising rights of way?
Can I just seek clarity from Councillor Alexander? Are you referring to why this was brought up the list of outstanding claims, or why it was while we're holding the extraordinary meeting?
Both, I think. Are they two separate answers to that question? In a sense, is there a reason why? I mean, why is it an extraordinary meeting? We could have included it in our normal cycle.
The extraordinary meeting, I can handle that one. It was felt that this would take quite a long chunk of an ordinary meeting and sink an ordinary meeting for us, because we do like to get in and out within a couple of hours, and it would have extended the time quite considerably. The report was ready, and therefore, as it was ready, it was important to hear it, I think, as soon as possible. So that's why it's an EGM, rather than tacking it on to a meeting which I think would have sunk an ordinary meeting for us. But the prioritisation of public rights of way, I will hand that over to that's an officer.
Okay, and that's to do with the preparedness of the... Okay.
Yeah. So going back a few years, the way that DMO applications were prioritised was basically just through date order. However, that was deemed, and again discussed at this committee, previous committees, that wasn't really acceptable, given that some rights of way were blocked, others were actually free and available for use. Because this one was actually blocked at the time that we were considered it, which is why when we reprioritised the list, it was actually brought much further up the list to be dealt with. So it was basically down to reprioritisation as requested by this committee, to look at blocked parts first. Of course, they're not currently blocked, but at the time when we started to look at this, and we were asked to look at this, they were blocked.
Okay, and none of these will be blocked should we make a positive decision?
I think that will depend on the outcome of if the decision is resolved to actually make an order, then any blocking of the path would deem to be obstruction of the highway.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Any other questions? Adam?
I was just going to say that thank you for the report and thank you for bringing this. And I was convinced by the evidence and the report that, there is evidence of the access. So, I'm sort of feel confident to move to a vote.
The move to vote. If I just say a few words, does anybody else want to say anything? Oh, Kaz.
Well, I wanted to thank all those that prepared reports or made submissions, including members of the public. I found it very useful. I have looked at the entire report as best as I can. and I noticed that some people say the bit on Cotton was buried, but I did actually find that in the report. I kind of look at this a little bit from my own personal experience as somebody who's lived in Bristol North West for 34 years, and I don't actually often visit this area, but I kind of recognise that that local residents would know much more about this than perhaps I do. I have occasionally wanted to go there maybe to consider walking my dog, and I'm kind of familiar with some of the ambiguity of the signage. And I've kind of looked at the things that Cottam School have said in their objections, and I'm kind of happy that all those can be dismissed without going into any details. So I think I'm coming at this from a point of view that I would be happy to accept these public rights of way. You know, I think there's been some issues about the signage over the years being unacceptable, and I can understand why people have gone onto the fields. I was up at the fields myself just on Monday. I've got some slight concerns about some of the things being said in terms of the sort of existence of the footpaths in terms of their routing. You know, a lot of the submissions say they're 2 metres wide. This sort of strikes me as maybe a coordinated campaign in some ways. I would expect someone maybe to say 5 feet or 1.5 metres, and 1 or 2 do. And the public footpaths aren't quite as noticeable as perhaps one might expect, but there again, I am kind of minded to believe that you know, in droughts, as somebody mentioned, you can actually see the existence of public footpaths, in particular the one from West Dean to Stoke Lodge. And I note that Stoke Lodge is used as a polling station, so that would, you know, kind of emphasise to me that people would want to use that particular route and other routes to get to Stoke Lodge. I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Cass. Tim?
Thanks. Just before we actually move to the actual vote, I just wanted to sort of say that I felt the evidence was quite strong and, in fact, overwhelming in pointing that, you know, clearly there was a footpath, a public right-of-way, and that people had accrued those rights over the time period. I personally felt the evidence showed that they met the upper test rather than the lower test, but I don't think we're necessarily needing to have to give a clear statement on that today. I'm relieved that, in fact, we do not need to argue over whether the signs are legally enough to stop those rights-of-ways being accrued or not, because, in fact, I think what we've been given here is clear evidence that the right-of-way had already been accrued by 1985. So those rights-of-way have existed, they just were not on the definitive map. So I have no problem at all supporting the recommendation as laid out in the paper. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. I do agree with you, actually. And what I find particularly powerful is the number of people who've actually supported these rights of way. 57 for Route 1, 39 for Route 2, 25 Route 3 and 34. And having read those statements, they're very different, and a lot of them are very passionate, and some go back a long way, actually. For me, that's very powerful. To me, there's very little doubt in my mind. You did raise an interesting point, Tim, about whether you want us to vote on balance of probability as opposed to regional. Is that something that you want us to do or not? Would that be helpful?
I mean, it's for the committee to decide, but obviously the officer has gone through, the independent consultant has gone through the evidence and provided his recommendation. So you would need to show why the high test and that you consider the right-of-way subsists on the balance of probabilities.
Tim, can I, because I'm pretty clear in my mind. I think Tim is pretty clear. We could.
Well, my view was that on balance of probability, I felt the test had been made. The problem with a balance of probability thing is an individual judgment, isn't it? It's very difficult to argue that. But there are overwhelming statements If at first you say that there is enough, that there is an allegation, then I think you need to ask yourself, well, how far beyond that allegation test do I think the evidence reaches? And my view was the evidence reached as far as, on balance of probability, I would argue that the test has been met.
Will you be happy to move that then, Tim?
Well, I'm more than happy to move that as long as it doesn't put our position in any legal jeopardy. I think that is, I am aware of the legal issues around this.
Yeah,
I
yes.
do not want to add to the problems regarding my personal viewpoint.
Let's take the officer recommendation then. What would you prefer?
Yeah, it's not what I prefer. It's certainly what you consider. But just to be clear, that it's either that the right-of-way subsists on the balance of probabilities, or that the right-of-way is reasonably alleged to subsist based on a reasonable assumption, reasonable test. So slightly different wording, but the decision is yours.
We won't be complicating anything legally by voting initially on balance of probability then.
As long as you've considered the evidence and you've come to that conclusion, it's your decision.
Because having spent a long time reading 850 pages, I'm pretty clear as well. Put our time to good use. Any other thoughts? Sorry, any other thoughts?
Yep, so to add to that, I would agree with Councillor Kent that that on the balance of probability, I would also conclude that the right-of-way subsists. I think there are arguments for 1965 to 1985. There were equal arguments, I think, for 1947 to 1967. I think that might be immaterial. The fact that there are arguments for two distinct time periods, totally nearly 40 years in total, to me leaves me with very little doubt whatsoever. So I would, if that were to be moved, I would second it.
Tim, would you like to move it? And I think you have a seconder. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, thank you. I just wanted to make a general point. So I only joined the committee a few days ago, so I've had to do some catching up. But I just wanted to say how moved I was by the strength of feeling on this from the public statements. It clearly holds such a good, strong value for people's recreation, for their well-being, for their health, for access. People using mobility scooters and the importance of doing that, as well as getting to places to vote and things like that. So I was very moved by that, and I think. Whereas I don't live in your corner of the city, I can see relevant places where this could become a future point of conflict in other areas of the city, and I do worry about the precedents this would set elsewhere. And I'm also just, so aware of green space in a city is such a finite thing, and restricting access to that is something that we have to be really mindful of and careful. Because it is a precious thing and it's so important to our health and well-being. So I'm also in agreement with that we've seen enough evidence here to go ahead with this, and that the time periods have been demonstrated that it has been in use for a significant amount of time. So yeah, I'm moved to agree.
Thanks, Eddie. Kaz?
Chair, I just wanted to make a general statement on about some things that Cottam schools say. And they mentioned safeguarding and promoting the welfare of children on page 825. I think we should all agree that the welfare of children and the safety of children is a high priority, and I believe the catchment area for Cottam School does include children from deprived areas, and access to physical activity is really important to them. I am concerned about what might happen with these public rights of way in terms of where the school children may end up playing, and I note that on the Stoke Lodge Facebook group, We Love Stoke Lodge Facebook group, said just a few days ago, warning to dog owners, my dog was attacked by a bulldog type dog at Stoke Lodge this afternoon. So I'm concerned about the possibility of things like dog attacks and children's safety, and I think that needs to be recognised. But I do note that the council has play areas unfenced, and there are public rights of way across schools like Harrow, which has fees of £16,850 a term. Just thought I'd drop that one in.
For the avoidance of doubt, I'm not familiar with Harrow, but
they do say things like keep dogs on leads, so there may be some things to be thought about here, whatever happens.
Okay, so we have a mover, Councillor Kent. Ed, you're seconding.
So I guess for clarity then, that we're moving that the committee believes that the concluding that the rights-of-way subsists, it must be on the balance. So we are concluding that the balance of probability has improved, but the right-of-way subsists, which is the higher test, and for that to be added into the recommendation.
I would like to second Councillor Kent's motion. Thank you.
Those in favour of balance of probability as moved by Councillor Kent? That looks like a unanimous decision. Members. Thank you, members, for your input. Thank you for the unanimous vote. It's always very helpful. And do we need to move? Do we need a further vote? Or is that it?
Steve, would you like to advise on that?
I think it's as we're voting on as amended. So I think it's pretty clear what we've done. I just wanted to say thanks to members for making my life very easy. Thank you for your input. And thank you to the public, because obviously your public forum statements help to shape our views. And thanks also to the many people who helped actually with the claim. Obviously, a big thanks to Professor Alan Preece, who put it all together and has lived with it. I suspect it's taken over your life, Professor Preece, but there we go. We are very grateful for all the hard work you've put in living with it. And thanks to officers who've also helped compile the report, and to Robin Carr. Thank you very much, everybody.